All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Patrick Wheeler and I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Digital Strategies. I want to also introduce you to Professor Alva Taylor. He's on the call. He is our Faculty Director here at the CDS. We also joined by Joe McDonald, our Assistant Director, and Carly Rao, who is a T22 and one of our first year MBA associates in the center. I also want to thank my colleagues in the Center for Business, Government, and Society, as well as Tuck Alumni Engagement for co-sponsoring today's session. We are incredibly excited and pleased to welcome Eric Ly to Tuck today for a fireside chat. This should be a fun and wide-ranging discussion. You're in for a treat, having connected with Eric already and discussed a lot of the topics for today. Thinking about Eric's background, it's an incredible background that we are all very envious of now as we were preparing for this session. After moving to the US from Vietnam, he was able to have an incredible education opportunities, go to Stanford where he studied symbolic systems, at MIT where he earned a master's in science and worked with the MIT Media Lab. He then returned to the Bay Area to work for some of the most important technology firms in Silicon Valley. His experience stretched across firms like Next Computer, IBM, Sun Microsystems, and a number of other ventures, working on projects and products that help shape the internet as we know it today. Some of those products, and he's a relatively modest guy, so I'm gonna point out how incredible some of this work really is. Include the operating system at Next Computer, which became Apple's Mac OS X. Working at Java, I believe before Java was actually called Java. It's, in the very early days, building that up. Worked on things like early PDAs and other mobile applications. These accomplishments alone would be eye-opening. But then in 2002, Eric joined with former Stanford classmates to co-found LinkedIn, where he was the founding CTO. At LinkedIn, he helped with strategic direction and development of product architecture, including the development of the search algorithm used on LinkedIn and other achievements. After LinkedIn, he moved into the venture space and investing and worked to fund a number of high-profile companies, including Spotify. Eric is also the founder of Presdo, which is an event platform that enables networking at conferences. Hub, a blockchain protocol designed to create greater trust in online interactions, and his current company, KarmaCheck, where he serves as the CEO. KarmaCheck reimagined background checks with a tech-first AI-driven approach to provide real-time background checks, shortening the time needed to make hiring decisions. We're pleased Eric can join us today and speak with the Tuck community. A special thank you again to Carly for making this session possible. Carly is as I mentioned, is one of our CDS MBA associates and worked with Eric prior to coming to Tuck in her role as an investor. Thank you, Carly. Eric, hopefully that does it justice. I think, we are excited to have you here and welcome to your first, but not last, we're sure of it, time speaking here with the Tuck audience.
Hey, Patrick, thanks a lot. I'm glad to be here. It definitely seems like you've done your research on my background. So it's probably one of the, much better intros that I've gotten in a long, long time. So thank you for doing the introduction.
Yeah. Well, I think, when you think about, the longer journey of your career, it includes a lot of foundational technologies, but also really interesting entrepreneurship activities and ventures. When you look back, what was that like? You were around at sort of the dawn of a lot of these internet technologies in particular, and really foundational computing technologies. What was that like, and how is that experience that you had at that time frame really shaped your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was one of those, folks who, I guess I'm kind of dating myself, but I was one of those folks who are, was around during the Internet 1.0 days, and I'm still at it. I have a passion for operating, as opposed to being on the venture side, in the early days, it was. It felt like a much smaller world, right? Like, tech these days, big tech, it's, kind of everywhere. And a lot of people are about tech. But in the early days, it was really, in a way, kind of a, village. Silicon Valley was, a very small place. And, people were kind of connected not very many degrees, from each other. And so it was a small community, and at that time it was really, a lot about kind of building tech and doing kind of interesting things. Now I think there's more of a mix of, well, how do you profit from it, and how do you get lots of users or get lots of business. So things have definitely changed, since the early days of the 1.0 internet era.
It's interesting. So the co-founder of the Center for Digital Strategies is Roger McNamee, and he talks about that same sort of transition, and he sort of describes it as this optimism coming out of the space race in the early 80s, transitioning over time into the sort of more business-oriented industry, mature industry that it is today. But as you mentioned, you're sort of still in the space. You're still focusing on building new products, services. How does what you're doing today, and I think we talked a little bit about your interests in some different technologies in particular. How does that shape, that transition of where the valley is today and where the industry is today, shape how you build a company today versus, if you think back to 2002 with LinkedIn?
Yeah. So obviously, I think every sort of era, every decade sort of builds on the foundations of the previous one. Even the name Silicon Valley kind of harks back to the time when it was about chips and fabricating semiconductors and things like that. My parents, who also had jobs in Silicon Valley, they were working in these semiconductor companies. But everything sort of evolves and builds on top of what came before. And I think one of the maybe misconceptions that people have is that, like, hey, there's going to be a point where things are going to be done and there's nothing more to innovate on. And in fact, that's really not true. There's always sort of new opportunities. It's sort of like a Mandelbrot set, if you can draw that analogy, which is that as tech grows, there's sort of reveals new surface area that point to new opportunities. And so the Internet 1.0 era was very much kind of foundational in terms of getting people online first, in terms of doing information searches, right? Then came the search engines, then came e-commerce, then came social networks, where it wasn't about accessing information anymore. It was about people interacting with each other. And then then came the mobile devices and the messaging, and we have things like Clubhouse these days, which is kind of the latest incarnation of that. So these days it really is about kind of working on the problems that are exposed by sort of these eras that have come before. So more of us are connected online these days than ever before. More of us are using the internet through mobile devices, and so that definitely lends itself to kind of new ways of interacting and new ways of transacting that lead to new opportunities. So in a way, it just kind of never stops, and it gets even more and more interesting, more and more sort of facets to explore. So
Eric, as you've talked about all the different changes, and you've been really smart about making, in many ways, the transition from technology or application or problem. What are the signals that you've seen that that it's time to move, or this is a good time to move to the next thing and the next thing? How do you look at that, where you say, okay, now I want to go into whether it's job, or now I want to go into social, or now I want to go into like what you're doing now with issues around sort of verification and blockchain?
Yeah, that's a great question, Professor. I have to say at the beginning, the way I kind of looked at new technologies and opportunities was very much out of intellectual kind of curiosity. Like, what was this new shiny object to study? The internet as a whole was definitely one of them, because as the internet kind of came out of research labs, right? And became turned from a defense thing to a commercial thing. And then there were things like, Java and so forth that, was the new shiny object at the time of the early internet. And so, going from sort of one interesting technology to another interesting technology, definitely, led me to interesting places. But one of the things that you realize as an entrepreneur is that there is sort of these underlying sort of, life cycles around certain technologies that, once something is sort of explored and there are companies that sort of dominate in those kinds of, technological areas, shall we say, it gets increasingly harder to kind of innovate in those areas. And so it makes sense to kind of move on to new areas that are maybe more nascent and offer new opportunities for innovation and commercialization. And so, I think one of the things I learned is that, over time is not just to look at new technology, but look at the sort of, practical implications or potential of technology in terms of opening up new spaces for, business opportunities and commercial success.
Great.
Yeah.
So, one of the pivots, right, was from this sort of focusing on the internet and where it was in the late 1990s, right around the turn of the millennium, to founding in 2002, being one of the lead co-founders of LinkedIn. What was that for you like, and sort of, that's one of the more significant companies to come out of that sort of social era, one of the earlier companies to come out of that social area that is still an incredibly powerful force in the business world. What was that like? How did that come to be, where that was where you kind of decided, okay, this is where we're gonna go forward with this idea?
Yeah, I mean, the origins of LinkedIn, there's definitely a very interesting backstory because part of the time situation at that point was that the internet was really sort of this bad boy, right? Having sort of experienced the .com boom and bubble and subsequent bust, and so that was really the time around when LinkedIn started. And so most investors, I would have to say, really had kind of written off the internet, which is, kind of interesting, 20 years since then, where, the internet sort of pervades, a lot of things these days. But, I think what was significant was that if you look at kind of all the, shall we say, first generation, social, networks, whether it was LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, they all got started within a couple of years of each other. And that was really interesting. And that was a transition where, it was really about, the internet becoming or turning from a vehicle where you could get information to a medium where people could use the internet to interact with each other. And we were one of the first at LinkedIn to realize that, people interacting with other people, online was going to be a useful thing. I mean, email was around, so we have to give credit to that. But there were sort of more sophisticated ways for people to interact with each other. And the problem that we were solving at that time was we were all, in Silicon Valley, trying to just keep track of our networks. In Silicon Valley, there's a lot of, job mobility. That is to say, people change jobs, pretty frequently. That it's actually happening even faster, these days. So having the, need to keep track of, where our network is, to sort of continue to maintain our network, to find interesting opportunities. If my friend happens to be at this company where I want to have a partnership with, it's valuable to know that. And so that was really the genesis of LinkedIn. And fortunately, there were a lot of people who, thought that was a very valuable thing as well, to have. So we were lucky in that respect.
It is really interesting because if the timing of it, and there's definitely a lot, plenty to say about the timing of when it's the right time to start a company. 2002 was not exactly, as you alluded to, the high point at venture funding and an energy going into a lot of, internet companies. that in of itself is really interesting. We see that a lot with down economies as well, you know, and the ability to really build yourself a little bit of breathing room while building a new company in an economy that's maybe not as hot, or at a time when there's a little bit of a lull. Did that help? Was that just really hard because of the funding? You know, you know, not a perfect question in the sense that you can't always know, but you know, did that give you that breathing room to really build the product? I mean, you're very much a technical person. It's a pretty interesting product in and of itself.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, there's this, you know, belief, and maybe it's been validated through, you know, analysis of, you know, technology history. But there's this sort of feeling that, you know, the biggest companies get built, you know, or they're started during, you know, downturns.
Yeah.
And there are numerous examples of that, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, you can name a lot of companies, and they were started around that time. And LinkedIn was definitely one of those companies. And it was interesting because, you know, looking back, you know, who would have known, you know, how long the kind of lull of the internet was lasting. But we, you know, we had a certain, you know, vision for LinkedIn. And so we started. But, you know, having personally experienced, I would say that, you know, there are some true things about, you know, starting companies in downturns. You know, for one, you really do have access to some really great talent, you know, just because there isn't such a competition for, you know, so many, you know, startup opportunities. You can actually kind of gather, you know, good talent and concentrate them. Which is what, you know, gives early stage companies a real advantage. The other, you know, benefit is that, you know, I think you can finally really work on something of value. You have some time. You know, you're not rushed, and you're not kind of competing with, you know, 10 other variants of, you know, the same idea. And so you have the time to really, you know, mature something and create something that is, you know, valuable for the market. And, you know, those are factors that, you know, you can directly see, you know, kind of makes sense to lead to, you know, building a strong company or a strong business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So you're currently, your latest kind of company is Karma Check, where you're also the CEO and as well as founder. Can you tell us a little bit about that company, kind of where your focus is, and sort of what you're bringing in from those past experiences to inform how you built that firm? Just
well,
a small question.
Yeah, we, you know, before we started the company officially, I mean, you know, one of the, I think, real benefits that we had at Karma Check was we spent quite a lot of time kind of stewing on the idea and really kind of designing the, you know, the concept and the, you know, really designing the you know, tenets of this company, and I think that incorporated a lot of the learnings that I've had over the years, and you know, to at least get us to a position that was, you know, more hopefully more assured of success. You never really know these things when you start, because every situation is different. But, you know, the kind of interest that we had around Karma Check was really around this idea of, you know, trust and the idea of, you know, truth. And that, you know, the information that one gets these days on the internet can be very easily falsified. And as people are, you know, making important decisions about, you know, others, or, you know, from the information that exists, it really is valuable to have the, you know, the information based on verified facts, as opposed to what, you know, merely somebody, you know, entered into, you know, the terminal or onto their profile. And so Karma Check is, you know, a digital identity company, and it's currently working in the background check area. to really kind of modernize the space. And background checks, it's primarily in the business of helping employers to screen the backgrounds of people, make sure that they're free from any kind of criminal history. Their educational backgrounds are verified. Work history things are also verified. Things like that. So it's kind of a total check, and it's sort of a great starting point, we believe, to launch into not only kind of reworking the space around background screening, but leads to some other very interesting things going forward as well.
When you're in the approach to karma check, or in general, how do you balance the issues around privacy versus anonymity versus verification?
Wow, that's a big question. Worthy of a dissertation or something like that. I guess first of all, I believe those are really important topics in the coming years for our digital lives. There's really a lot of sort of opportunities to set things right with regard to all those different factors. I believe we live in the world today where a lot of those things are kind of broken, not just in the verification area that we're concerned with, but in terms of privacy, who has control of the data, how the data gets used. We've gotten to the point where these social platforms have become so successful that user data is really often used at odds with the way that users want to use that data.
With all the criticism that's been that many of the media and networking companies have gathered, LinkedIn has avoided much of that. Why do you think what is it about the LinkedIn that it's avoided much of that? And how does that philosophy around, how do you deal with disinformation, et cetera, play into that?
Well, I think from the early days, LinkedIn really had this, priority, this focus on the member, the individual user. The idea was that really the priority, of the platform should really serve users and not necessarily employers. So, for example, in the early days of LinkedIn, there were definitely companies that would make kind of social software, and they would sell them to companies to allow companies to keep track of their employees and profile them and kind of use them to kind of understand the inventory of talent. But LinkedIn took a very different approach where, it was about the member, it was something that they felt ownership, in. And, the company did a lot of things around ensuring that people's information, particularly, for example, their contact list was well protected from, exploitation of others, even though it was kind of on this overall platform that anyone had access to. So there were lots of controls around, how you could protect your network, essentially. And I think that was a very good, motivation, a very good, mission for the company, to be on. And I think that was definitely, part of what, led to its success. I would say that, in general, what LinkedIn tried to do was to really enforce some, very good habits on the user base, before sort of, broadening the capabilities of the platform. So for example, we took the longest time to before we added photos, to the platform, that you can add a photo to your profile on the platform, even though, it would have been very easy to do that, but the concern was that people would sort of abuse the the photo to kind of put up, anything that they wanted. And so we wanted to kind of, grow the network in such a way to kind of promote healthy, appropriate practices, and at least in the way that we thought so. So I think that really did help to kind of ensure a quality platform versus, a more kind of anything goes, kind of policy, which I think definitely does have merit, but it's also, more challenging, right? Because you kind of have to, screen out the kind of undesirable, aspects and behaviors of that. I think, the recent election, for example, I think really demonstrated tested the limits of, how these tools get used. Yeah.
It's a good point. So when you think about this misinformation, disinformation, sort of, as well as some of the impacts of feedback loops, among social networks, how do you now look at what's going on with social, with this sort of challenges with information, challenges with all sorts of, there's a lot to unpack there, I know, but it's a really interesting time to be looking at social networks. And having founded, a social network, I imagine you have some pretty, interesting or thoughts on sort of where we're at today, and sort of what we might want to start doing differently. How do you think about sort of social networks today and the troubles around, as you mentioned, disinformation, misinformation, trust, as well as these sort of echo chambers?
Yeah, I think it's a really, serious problem, for our time. And it's something that, we really do, need to address, in quite a serious way. And, the reason is because, it's become so much easier for people to put information online. And it's because of that it's led to, all of these sort of problems. So, on the one hand, it's led to a lot of opportunities for information sharing, but on the other hand, it's really created some very serious problems. So, I used to believe that, it was, a kind of a serious problem, but it actually has become even more serious, in terms of, politics and what we've seen in the last election around, information and misinformation and disinformation, and the ability of social media platforms to really persuade people around what is the truth, and that's that leads to kind of a divided country that we have right now, where people really believe in what they believe in, what they maybe want to believe in, but it may not necessarily be the truth. And then the other thing is that it really also impacts our survival and our health. I mean, with the recent pandemic, and the information about the how vaccines ought to be handled or taken. I mean, it's become a health issue as well. And so it's no longer for kicks, whether you need to have truth and information or not. It really does impact our lives. And so the magnitude of the problem is just so so vast. So you have a company like Facebook, who has employed tens of thousands of people to kind of check posts and look at abusive content and that sort of thing. I often wonder whether even with the amount of resources that a Facebook has and their ability to kind of hire people to curate this content, whether that's even going to solve it, because the amount of information that gets posted and shared is so great that it seems like it's not tractable to actually solve a problem in that way, and so I think it brings up more questions. We're sort of at the point right now where there are these major challenges among social networks and, information sharing, that, there's more questions than I would say there are answers. But I do believe it's very urgent that we, really take a shot at this, solving these problems in the next few years.
Yeah. So switching gears to a technology on the other end of the spectrum that I know you're really interested in, and that's blockchain. Would love to hear your thoughts. Your founding of Hub and thinking about protocols for blockchain and your personal interest. Why are you a proponent of the technology, and where do you see the value coming from that technology going forward?
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting time for blockchain right now, primarily because, in 2021 so far, there's just been such a rise in, crypto values. It's made the news and all that, gotten, people to pay attention, where, just a year ago or even 2 years ago, the crypto space was very much in a bear market, and now it's reaching new heights, and so it's kind of renewed interest for a lot of people. So that in itself is sort of an interesting direction for blockchain. I very much view cryptocurrency and digital assets as sort of an application for blockchain. It's actually just one application, a very interesting application for blockchain. But if you take a look at the underlying technology, what I saw about blockchain were many, similar sort of reasons why I got excited, about internet back in the late 90s. What was interesting was about the internet and about blockchain was that here was kind of a whole new way of thinking about how to conceive of, organizing, technology, organizing information. And blockchain is really, in a way, a revolution around that. So when I, started reading about blockchain, back in 2017, it took me a few months to really understand all of the kind of concepts around it. And then, a few months after that, it all kind of clicked for me, how all these concepts around decentralization and cryptocurrencies sort of all, made sense and worked together. And it sort of dawned on me at that time that whether a group of really smart people that just kind of, created this alternate universe, a different way of doing things that really could lead to some new ways of solving problems. And if I can say one thing about blockchain, it is that it's a really, really secure database that you can store things that can't be tampered with. Right? There's this term around blockchain called immutability, and that's one of the core foundational kind of principles around this technology, and it's what makes it possible to have things like cryptocurrency. Because people don't want to tamper with money. They if they spend it or transfer it, they don't want this kind of double spend problem that can happen. And so that's something that blockchain enables is cryptocurrency. But blockchain also enables a ton of other things as well. So by allowing such a secure storage of information, it makes it more valuable to store things like verified facts, verified information, and that starts to get to some of the things that I'm also very interested in, right, around trust and truth. So that's kind of where the intersection is at kind of a high level.
It was well timed, and I love what you said about it took you a little bit to kind of really understand what's going on and dig into the technology. Earlier today, we led a workshop on blockchain sort of in our Tech 101 series. And I think, what I typically see with students is in the session, they're like, I still don't know that it's clicking. And so to hear someone with your background and your technical knowledge and your experience say, it isn't like an instantaneous, I just get this, right? It isn't necessarily as intuitive as some things in the tech world, I think is really encouraging for our students too, to hear and to struggle with it and to to try to understand it. So I didn't cue that up that way, but it was incredibly helpful for me and for the center and for our students to hear that message as well. I think so much of the way that technology is built today is to be very user-centric and very friendly and very intuitive. And so, blockchain is at the other end of the spectrum there. It is a concept that takes a bit to grapple with to really understand why this works the way it does. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if I could respond to that just for a moment. I definitely, encourage people who, maybe, want to understand blockchain to have some patience around that. There's some really, deep concepts in there that I think are quite interesting, and they take some time to understand. Just like in the early days, I remember, back in the Internet 1.0 days, we were all talking about this weird thing called a, URL, and what is the World Wide Web, kind of thing. And of course, today we're living and breathing it. So it does take some time for these really new concepts to get absorbed. But there's definitely some really insightful concepts around this technology.
Yeah. So to that point, how do you learn? Like, how do you think about going about learning these new technologies, learning new business models, learning, new concepts that will help inform either your current ventures or future companies even, perhaps? Like, what is your sort of approach there and staying on top of it? Because as you mentioned, the world of tech has really grown and expanded, and that creates a lot more opportunities, but that's also a lot of ground to cover to stay on top of things.
Well, if I could have the perfect answer to that, I'd probably be, on an island somewhere drinking, Mai Tais and stuff. But I would say the first thing that's really important is to, really have an open mind, right? To have the sensibility that things are always changing and progressing, and that, especially in technology, that things don't, stay the same for long. And so there is this, motivation for kind of lifelong learning, to continue to be open-minded to, new possibilities. Because even when you feel like you've figured something out, there's some, really smart young kid that comes along and, has some idea and says, oh, the world is, really should be structured like this other different way. And to not dismiss that, and to really kind of look for, the truly sort of new and innovative ideas that exist out there. So I think it's really important as an entrepreneur to continue to have that mindset that not things get reinvented and invented all the time. So it's really important to keep up. But secondly, I think because we're always in a mode of innovation, it's really important to kind of plug into a community of the practitioners, the people who are kind of at the forefront of any field, and continue to talk to them and learn from them. And that's really important to do, especially in an area like technology where things are getting invented all the time. So yeah.
Yeah, if we could flip that a little bit, because you talked about one of the advantages of starting in a downturn is the ability to get this concentration of talent. How do you now think about identifying talent when you talk to people, when you're hiring, when you're scaling up your companies? How do you think about the identification choice piece of that?
Yeah, it's first of all, I'll have to say that when you start a company, when you have an entrepreneurial mission, it's really important to surround yourself with kind of good people. The team is just about everything at the beginning, maybe even more so than the initial idea, because for sure you don't have the product, so you've got to your assets are really about the people. So it's important to kind of really pick who it is who's on your team, I believe in teams that, work well together. That means you have to really design a team. I'm not a believer in, for example, teams that are made up of, a lot of rock stars, because what tends to happen is that you tend to have kind of a dysfunctional team. Everybody wants to be their own cook, and, hardly anything gets done. And that's bad. You actually want a well-functioning, a team that fits well together, and can work well together as a team. So that's really important. And I also believe, and I continue to look for this, is that attitude and motivation are more important than sort of skill and experience. And the reason for that is it's actually very simple. The world is changing all the time. What people have known, what they're expert at, that quickly becomes obsolete over time. And so you want somebody who has kind of the mindset to, want to learn and to want to keep up with things. And I think that's the best insurance, for, continuing to survive in a very, competitive marketplace, which technology is definitely one of those kinds of spaces. So.
I want to make sure we have some time to answer kind of questions from the audience members. We could keep going for sure for quite a while now, but we don't want to make sure that we're getting to some of the questions from the audience. So again, as a reminder, there's a Q&A pod at the bottom. Feel free to put your questions in there, and we'll do our best to get to every question that we can. We'll start off, with a question from Sergey. He's asking about, you mentioned Clubhouse, and he's asking whether you think that might be a product of COVID and the inability to socialize en masse, or is it something, where the future of social media is the next iteration beyond Facebook, Twitter, et cetera?
I think we're all trying to figure out what this phenomenon called Clubhouse, is. I've talked to some, smart people and gotten their opinions about, Clubhouse. And, I think one of the, stand-up points about Clubhouse is that it's, really is a, great medium where people can get access to quality, conversations that are, led by, experts in their field, right? So whether it's Elon Musk or some expert on blockchain or crypto, or some investor, there are people who show up on Clubhouse, and everyone is able to kind of interact with them. I do believe that there is this kind of new medium around voice that's been exposed. It's sort of like text has been made much more interesting, with messengers and social networks. I think the best analogy for Clubhouse is that radio is getting reinvented to be much more interactive via Clubhouse. So I do believe that the platform has benefited from the pandemic times. But it's really, probably going to have, some real staying power after the pandemic, subsides. And, we're going to kind of see it as a new way for us all to, interact. So I think it's definitely going to be part of the future. I mean, the other thing I think is that Clubhouse does definitely have its challengers. All of the above mentioned social networks are definitely working on their version of Clubhouse. So it remains to see how all those solutions are going to compete with each other.
Yeah. Carly, what do you think? do we have some other questions?
Yeah, I was actually going to hop in with one of my own questions.
Perfect.
To be a little selfish. Eric, I think the pandemic has challenged us all personally in a lot of ways, but it also gives us a lot of opportunity for growth. How have you evolved sort of as a leader of Karma Check over the, last year or so now?
Well, I would say for me personally, I have not given that question a lot of thought because frankly, it's been so busy over the last year. I think one of the side effects of the pandemic is, believe it or not, not having to drive, to work or to meetings has saved a lot of time and made it possible for, in a way, all of us to become, more productive. So if that's like back-to-back Zoom meetings or, Zoom fatigue, it's all part of the same, experience. I would say, for me, having a bit more, understanding of the challenges that people go through in their daily lives, their kind of personal lives. The compassion is, I think, really kind of, key to, getting through this era that, we each have our sort of individual challenges besides the kind of responsibility around, our professional, lives. I think for me personally, it's the experience, of the last year has really been, getting back to, maybe the things that are really important, for us as kind of people and, taking out the things that, have been, considered at least distractions, in my life, right? And just kind of focusing on things that, should truly be, friends, relationships, things like that. So hopefully, as a leader, I'm more, compassionate and tuned into, kind of the needs that, our team members have. It's definitely very much harder to, just pass by somebody's office and say, hey, how are you doing? That kind of experience is impossible these days. We're all remote. But to be more attentive, during the times when I'm interacting with teammates, I think, it's good to kind of be aware that there are things that are going on in people's lives behind the scenes.
Right. Let's see what other questions we have here. Question from David Kagunda. Do you think calls for antitrust regulation with regards to social networks are timely? Is that needed at this time? Great. Yeah.
Great. I believe Facebook itself has definitely welcomed some regulations, for the industry. I would agree with that. I think that having certain guide rails are definitely valuable, and specifically to antitrust. I agree with some of that. I have to say, I think big tech is a term that is well deserved. Actually, it's a very big tech has gotten very pervasive in all of our lives, and so I definitely think that's kind of worth looking at. But I suppose one hopes the technology companies hope that to some extent they could be self-regulating, such that they can avoid antitrust challenges. But I think it's if anything, if we've learned anything from the last kind of 20 years of this current internet era, is that there's definitely been some companies that have gotten very big and very powerful, and there needs to be some some guide rails for how they operate.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the discussions we've had with a number of folks, including a very vocal critic in this space, Roger McNamee, who's our co-founder, is that the regulation could open this big avenue for entrepreneurs to create even new solutions. You're an entrepreneur and you've built a number of companies. Do you think that would happen? Is that something that you see as a possibility if there is regulation of enabling more entrepreneurship and growing entrepreneurship, or is that kind of a a hope and a wish that if that comes to pass, it's a benefit.
I do believe it's a true thing.
Okay.
I've definitely seen instances where, these sort of massive forces, tends to, make it quite challenging for people, for entrepreneurs to, start something new. But it might be overstated as well, because honestly, to start anything, especially in a more established space, it is challenging, and so I think it'll help a little bit, but I tend to think of things like regulations or antitrust as more serving the benefits of users and the control of their data, that sort of thing, than it probably would actually help entrepreneurs be more innovative. I do believe it's going to help to a degree, but maybe not as much as entrepreneurs want.
Yeah.
To help.
Yeah. We have another question about data security and the role of the chief security officer or chief information security officer. How do you view those types of roles? They're definitely growing in prominence and increasingly elevated right up beneath the CEO and a lot of large companies in particular. But how do you think about the role that an executive leading data security and information security plays in a company today?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that is developing within corporate America. For example, Zoom, I think it was probably the most high profile stories of late, where when they had to hire a chief security officer to really tighten up the security around the app itself. So I do believe that there's a large role for those kinds of roles to play within corporate America, if not to secure the apps themselves, to really secure the data that those apps deal with, and so for sure that's definitely one of the areas that is interesting for me. But I think that there's kind of a dimension beyond that in terms of the roles that such officers play today. Is that I don't think we've taken a really hard look at how we can secure data yet, whether intentionally or even avoiding getting hacks from all the data that company holds. And I think there's a expanded role that such executives should need to play in the coming years, hopefully with kind of an enlightened perspective around those kinds of issues.
Another question that we got in was from one of the second year CDS fellows, Arlene, and she's asking if you could speak a little bit more to self-regulation and what you think success looks like. She asks because she can see self-regulation bleeding into how algorithms are built to feed a really specific or curated information to each user. And so she's asking, what would a good personalized newsfeed look like in your opinion?
Wow, that's a really great question. I have to say I haven't given much thought to that. I think that one of the things that needs to, or maybe has happened is some kind of appropriate balance between information that's shared platform-wide with what information is shared on a very kind of focused way, because you don't really want either extreme. You want some place in the middle. The problem with information that is shared platform-wide is that it might not be very relevant for you, right? So just because it's possibly interesting for everyone doesn't mean that you're interested in it. So I think one of the opportunities of platforms is that they can personalize information to you. But if the information becomes too personalized, then you tend to kind of get these echo chambers, around let's call it fake news that you only want to be engaged in, right? So there has to be some kind of balance between those two kinds of things. So however those algorithms kind of get put together, I think that's still a work in progress by a lot of the companies. But I mean, let's put it this way though. I think there is this conflict though between user privacy and the kinds of things that they want to really do in the platform, and the profit maximizing motive that these corporations have, and often that's really at odds with each other. And so I feel like there's a limit to how far self-regulation can go, and that's why I think there's room for regulation still to sort of ensure kind of checks and balances with these platforms.
Building on that, I have a quick follow-up that's sort of a little bit of a tangent there. You've built a number of companies that don't predominantly monetize via advertising networks. And I think to your point that you made, the advertising business model has played a significant role in driving that disconnect between what users want and what the profit motives of the company are. Is there a reason why you seem, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you seem to not be as big on building companies that are based on ad models? Is that by design? Is that just happens to be the space you play in? Is that to avoid these conflicts? If you could share a little bit about that would be really interesting.
Well, now you've touched on a touchy topic, Patrick. I think you caught me there. I'm not particularly a big fan of advertising models, although the internet has definitely been very successful, built on advertising models. So it's it's sort of a controversial topic, right? But yeah, I do believe that there is a world in which maybe there's less fewer business models that are based on advertising and more on business models that are built on other things. If I may say, the advertising models, even as they've been transferred from other media onto the internet, is sort of a old world business model. I mean, it's very undirected, untargeted. It's very spammy. It's very noisy. I mean, those are all the sort of negatives about it, but it's also been very successful. So, I think the opportunity is, can we evolve to something that is, less advertising, in the traditional senses, and something that is more, relevant, for people, and takes advantage of the use of technology and I don't want to say data, but let's call it preferences, such that the right message gets to the right person and only the right people. So I hope that we can kind of get there eventually, rather than through something that is less targeted, which it feels like feels like a lot of the world still is at today.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that, and it struck me. I was watching the Mars rover landing, and the amazing thing that we can do in putting this this rover on Mars. And I think about where our resources are going in companies, and you see the growth of these sort of data analytics in companies, just to figure out how to target you to sell you something else, as opposed to building value in the core product. And at some point we've got to turn back to putting those really smart people on the core value of the product, and not trying to figure out ways just to sell you things. So I applaud that perspective.
Yeah, I think we can be more innovative, around how to deliver value, as opposed to, maybe how to, deliver more ads. So I think we're, all looking for that, and the opportunities of, better algorithms or, better personalization still exists out there to, like you said, Professor, to deliver the right message, to the right people, only.
All right. that there's a question about investing and thinking about investing in companies. And when you're evaluating whether or not to invest in a company, how much of the, as you've kind of put it, the world should be structured in a different way kind of component, as I think you put it, as learning from new folk, plays into how you think about investing, whether that's investing as an investor or whether that's investing in the right people to bring into your organization.
Right. Well, that's a really, that's a question that's, has a lot of answers to it. If I can answer the part about, how to make investment choices, especially, into things like, startups. I said, before that, people are very important, and, the team is very important. So you definitely have to look at that. In fact, for early stage opportunities like seed stage, or even early stage beyond that, that's usually for me the number one criteria is like how good is the team in what they're doing. The business idea definitely is a factor, right? And there what you're looking for is I would say two things, right? How big is the addressable market? And then secondly, is there a product or a solution that, really is going to work to address, that market? As long as those things kind of, check out, then you should kind of go ahead and, make an investment, in it. But, the hard part is that you don't often, find, all those things in kind of a perfect combination, right? So that's where the, decision making, the art, if you will, of investing really comes in. So I would say, but those are the kind of the main criteria around making investment decisions. I mean, what does Carly say? She's the expert.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think about when David and I spoke to you about Karma Check, what we were really excited about was, well, obviously, as Patrick has highlighted for all of us, you have an amazing background. But also just the amount of places it could go. And it's interesting, having just sort of talked about not pursuing the advertising model. Karma Check's goal ultimately is to really understand who someone is as a person in a verified manner, and to have someone, especially coming from an advertising background, who sees that there's a lot of power in that data, and that it's maybe not put best to use to try to get someone to purchase something, was really exciting for me, both as like a potential investment, but also on a personal level in terms of like what feels good about the world and is truly innovative.
Dynamite. There is a question around blockchain, and sort of, you mentioned kind of you need to dig in and start to learn. There's a question around where to start that process, and where do you tell people that are interested in learning about blockchain to start?
Well, to start, I mean, if you're someone who is really, at the beginning, and all is this word and nothing else, I think there's some, really good books that you can get on the, on the subject. And, I think Amazon has a lot of those books that you can get. I've recommended, a couple, in my day. So definitely start there. But, the interesting thing is that those books really only provide you the basics, and even some of the more advanced chapters, they're kind of out of date now. And the space is moving so fast, and innovation is happening so much that it's really worth it to to get into the community and to really talk to the practitioners about the kinds of things that they are developing and thinking. This whole new wave around DeFi, I think, is frankly very interesting, and holds a lot of real value, and that's just on the cusp of innovation right now. So there's really no way to learn about that stuff except going to maybe attending events or meetups where those kinds of topics are discussed by people who are trying to invent the future, to use the cliche, and to maybe even get involved in doing a company or project of your own as you know, participating into that. But it really is a fast moving space. And so I would just say, you know, get the basics down, and then, you know, go, you know, join communities or go join events, and really learn from, you know, people who are, you know, trying to create the, you know, the new world in this space.
So you've talked about, you know, blockchain, your interest in blockchain, and you've done a great job in seeing things changing over time. Is there any other new breaking possible areas that you find exciting, that you just, you know, that you find interesting to read about or think about, or you think that's, you know, potentially could become more important in the future?
You know, actually, I don't get as much time as I'd like to kind of, you know, explore, you know, new areas. I think, you know, investors, I think, you know, often have a really great view, right? Kind of being at the top of the food chain, you know, to, you know, look across the landscape at interesting deals and opportunities. And you know, I can only imagine it's a very, you know, stimulating, you know, job to be an investor, you know, full time. So you know, us here in the trenches, right? You know, we tend to be focused on, you know, getting one or a few things right, and going deep into those things. So so that's kind of the nature of things. But you know, just to share one example, I am very recently interested in DeFi. You know, there's a lot of hype in DeFi. There's a lot of doubt, you know, as to whether this is just pure speculation, or, you know, there's really something of value there. And I'm one of those people who believes that there is real value that it's, you know, DeFi has the potential to, you know, DeFi, you know, stands for decentralized finance, but I believe it has the opportunity to democratize, you know, finance. And you know, one of the things that gets talked a lot about in blockchain is this kind of idea around, you know, financial inclusion. And I do believe that, you know, DeFi is going to open up opportunities for greater financial inclusion, and has the potential to, you know, in many ways disrupt the financial services industry as we know it. And as we know, that's a big industry, you know, filled with lots of, you know, money, if nothing else. And so, you know, the transfer of, you know, value from kind of the traditional, you know, centralized industry to, you know, something that is more decentralized, I think is going to be fascinating, and something that is going to happen in the years to come. So I'm learning a lot about DeFi, because that is a very fast moving space right now in blockchain. You know, concepts are getting created, you know, very quickly, you know, on a weekly or, you know, kind of basis. And so I think the developments are frankly kind of mind blowing. So it's yeah, definitely for the advanced, you know, blockchain enthusiasts to try to understand all those things. And if you're like a, you know, a finance head, I think it's infinitely fascinating as well.
You know, as we think about our audience of students on the line, as well as others, you know, many of them are transitioning into careers as leaders in technology and in digital strategies, whether that be at technology companies, at more kind of traditional organizations, you know, and roles like product manager and working in marketing and others. What advice do you have for them as they sort of depart business school and move into what is probably a new area for some of them, not all, and sort of how to really grow their career in the short term and think about it in the long term at the same time? Like, what advice would you give our students?
Yeah, I mean, that's a super broad question. So, you know, I would say, you know, always, you know, always be learning new things. You know, part of that answer is definitely, you know, try to understand the technology, because, you know, technology is kind of permeating just kind of everything, you know, these days. And so it's always good to kind of have an understanding of how, you know, technology intersects with your your field. You know, I would say always, you know, be a student, you know, to learn about the things that are happening out there in the world, even beyond school. So as long as you can adapt and do new things, I think there's always going to be a need for you, you know, out there. That's what I would, you know, say, is to continue to, you know, have a, you know, open mind and a kind of a hunger for, you know, new ideas and to, you know, always be a student.
Yeah, it's you know, listening to Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, he talks about this as don't be a know-it-all, be a learn-it-all, and really focus on the learning, and that they're optimizing for that. It sounds, you know, very similar to the way that you've explained it, and I think it's something that we hope to inspire here in the center and at Tuck, is this passion for lifelong learning and continual refresh of the knowledge and the perceptions, and being able to ask good questions and change your mind about things as you ingest more information or learn more about the way things are unfolding and evolving. So that perhaps is maybe a really good place to stop as we're at time. You know, on behalf of the center, on behalf of the entire Tuck community, my colleagues in the Center for Business, Government, and Society, as well as the alumni engagement office, we can't thank you enough for spending this time with us, Eric. It was insightful, enjoyable, really enlightening for me, and for I know for the others on the call as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and thanks for inviting me to this session today.
Thanks, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And a big thank you to Carly again for introducing Eric to Tuck and to the Center for Digital Strategies.
Yeah, Eric, thanks so much for joining. We're forever grateful, and it was great to see you on a Zoom again.
Thanks, Carly.
All right. Thanks, everyone. You know, we welcome you to check out more information and future events on our website from the Center for Digital Strategies and from all of our partners, and look forward to seeing you at future events.